The universe had long feared the hydro weapons. An ancient technology, older than most civilizations still standing. These weapons were not designed to destroy cities or vaporize planets. No, they were far worse. A single drop of the liquid could disassemble the biological structure of any known species, breaking them down into something unrecognizable, something no longer alive. The weapons had been locked away, their creators lost to time, their purpose fading into whispered legends. No one dared tamper with them. No one except humans. When the Galactic Council discovered a group of human explorers had gotten their hands on a hydro weapon, panic spread like wildfire. Empires sent emissaries, warning humanity of the horrors they had unearthed. Scientists across the stars predicted extinction-level consequences. The warnings were dire, absolute. Do not open the vials. Do not interact with the liquid. Do not even breathe near it. But humans had never been good at listening. Dr. Elias Carter, lead researcher of the Terran Expansion Initiative, was the first to propose the unthinkable. What if, he had said, eyes gleaming with curiosity, we don't use the hydro weapon? What if we consume it? The silence that followed was deafening. His colleagues thought he was joking, that stress had finally broken his mind. But Elias wasn't laughing. The first test subject was a volunteer, Captain Rachel Vasquez, a seasoned explorer with more near-death experiences than birthdays. She sat in the sterile lab, a vial of shimmering blue liquid in front of her. The entire room watched, breathless, as she lifted the vial and took a single, deliberate sip. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then her body convulsed. Monitors blared warnings. Her skin turned pale, veins darkening like ink spreading through water. Scientists scrambled, shouting orders, ready to intervene. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Rachel gasped, sitting upright. Her vitals stabilized. The eerie discoloration in her veins faded, leaving behind something else. Something more. She exhaled, a breath that sent a faint ripple through the air, making the very walls tremble. Then she smiled, and it wasn't just relief, it was power. News of the experiment spread faster than any containment protocol could stop. Other humans volunteered. More tests were conducted. And one by one they changed. The hydro weapon, a substance feared across galaxies, wasn't killing them. It was rewriting them, making them stronger, faster, more resistant. It was turning them into something new. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings. The universe had spent millennia fearing this weapon, keeping it locked away, ensuring no species could ever wield its power. But now the impossible had happened. Humans had adapted to it. Worse, they had embraced it. And then the first real test came. A fleet from the Udar Dominion, a species known for their brutal conquest and absolute intolerance of resistance, descended upon a human colony, intending to crush them before their transformation was complete. The Udar had fought humans before. They had won before. This time, they expected no different. They were wrong. When the Udar soldiers landed, they were met not by terrified civilians or overwhelmed security forces, but by something else entirely. Humans who moved faster than the eye could track, who tore through armor like paper, who shrugged off wounds that should have been fatal. The Udar fought with their usual brutality, deploying their strongest warriors, their deadliest weapons. But it didn't matter. The humans didn't just survive. They thrived. By the time the first Udar warships fled, desperate to report what they had witnessed, it was already too late. The balance of power had shifted. The one weapon that had been feared by all had become the very thing making humanity unstoppable. And as the universe watched, one question echoed through every species, every government, every trembling empire. What happens when the most unpredictable species in the galaxy is given the most powerful weapon ever created? And instead of fearing it, they consume it. The Udar fled, but the universe did not rest easy. Whispers spread across star systems, carrying warnings of what had transpired on that distant human colony. Governments scrambled to understand how a species so young, so reckless, had turned one of the most feared weapons in history into their greatest strength. Spies were sent to infiltrate human research stations, desperate to uncover their secret. Scientists across the galaxy theorized, debated, and feared. How had they survived? How had they adapted? And, most terrifying of all, what would they become next? On Earth, deep beneath the surface in a classified research facility, Dr. Elias Carter watched a screen filled with shifting lines of data. The room around him hummed with energy, machines analyzing the genetic changes taking place within the first wave of volunteers. The results were beyond anything he had expected. Increased cellular regeneration, enhanced neural pathways, strength that defied biology itself. Every human who had consumed the hydro weapons liquid had changed in a way that science couldn't fully explain. But there was something else. Something hidden beneath the raw power and rapid adaptation. A quiet anomaly buried deep in the data, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. "Doctor, you should see this," a voice called out. It was Dr. Miralang, one of the lead geneticists. She stood over a microscope, her hands tense on the controls. Elias stepped forward, peering through the lens. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. The cells, human cells, were still changing. Not just strengthening. Not just adapting. They were evolving. The process wasn't stopping. It wasn't slowing down. The transformation was still happening, deep inside their DNA. Elias straightened, his mind racing. If the hydro weapon had rewritten them once, what was it doing now? Before he could say anything, alarms blared through the facility. The lights flickered, and a voice crackled through the intercom. "Unidentified vessels have entered Earth's orbit. All personnel, report to designated security zones immediately." Elias and Mira exchanged a glance. They both knew what this meant. The rest of the universe wasn't going to wait for answers. They were coming for them. Above the planet, a fleet loomed in the darkness of space. Ships belonging to multiple factions, some allies, some enemies, all united by the same fear. They had seen what the humans had done to the Udar. They couldn't let it happen again. A message was broadcast across all human channels. "This is High Commander Vexen of the Galactic Council. You are to cease all experimentation on the hydro weapon immediately. Surrender your research, or we will take it by force." Silence filled the command center of the Terran Defense Fleet. Captain Rachel Vasquez stood at the front, watching the incoming transmission with narrowed eyes. She had felt the power of the hydro weapon in her own veins. She had stood against the Udar and watched them break. She had become something more. And now they wanted to take it all away. She tapped into the communication link, her voice steady. "Commander Vexen, you misunderstand. We are not experimenting. We are surviving. And we are not surrendering." The air in the command center was thick with tension. The Galactic Council had never issued a warning like this before. This was not diplomacy. This was an ultimatum. The screen flickered again, this time showing the face of another species, Ambassador Jorvun of the Zalari. Unlike the Council, the Zalari had never openly threatened humans. They had always remained neutral, observing from the shadows. But now, even they seemed uneasy. "Captain Vasquez," Jorvun said carefully, his dark eyes studying her. "We have watched your kind defy limits before. But this is something else. Do you truly understand what you have done?" Rachel clenched her jaw. She understood better than anyone. The hydro weapon hadn't just changed them physically. It had done something else, something deeper. She had felt it in the way her mind processed thoughts faster than before, the way she could sense things she never could before. It was as if the universe itself had become clearer, like she had been looking through fog her whole life without realizing it. But she couldn't show doubt now. Not when the entire universe was waiting to see if humanity would falter. "We understand enough," she said. "And we're not afraid of what comes next." The ambassador sighed, his expression unreadable. "Then I fear your war has already begun." In the depths of the research facility, Dr. Elias Carter stared at the latest data streaming across the screen. His fingers hovered over the console, hesitating. The numbers, the patterns, they were changing faster than before. Something was accelerating the transformation. His pulse quickened. He needed more time to study this, to understand what was happening. But time was the one thing they no longer had. The silence in the command center was heavy, the weight of the ambassador's words settling over the room like a storm cloud. Rachel Vasquez stared at the transmission screen, her heartbeat steady but quick. The war had already begun. Maybe it had started the moment humanity consumed the hydro weapon. Maybe it had started the moment they defied the universe's warnings. It didn't matter anymore. She turned to her crew, their faces tense but unwavering. They had seen the fear in the eyes of the Galactic Council, the hesitation in the Zalari's voice. The entire universe was terrified, not of what humans had done, but of what they were becoming. And fear led to war. Rachel exhaled slowly. "All stations, prepare for incoming hostiles. We hold our ground." Across Earth's orbit, the assembled fleet of alien warships loomed. Some were built for destruction, bristling with weapons designed to tear through battleships. Others were more delicate, reconnaissance vessels meant for surveillance and extraction. They weren't here just to threaten, they were here to control. Deep underground, Dr. Elias Carter sat frozen before his screen, the data pulsing like a heartbeat. The transformation was accelerating. The changes within the human volunteers weren't stopping. They were intensifying. Neural activity had tripled in some, their brain patterns shifting beyond anything resembling normal human function. Others showed signs of increased cellular adaptation. Denser muscle fibers, faster reflexes, heightened sensory perception. Mira Lang's voice was tight with urgency. This isn't stabilizing, Elias. It's progressing. Elias knew what she meant. The Hydra weapon hadn't just rewritten them. It had set something in motion. Something that couldn't be undone. And now, the rest of the universe was here to make sure it never went any further. A sharp beep interrupted his thoughts. The security feeds flickered, then filled with static. He sat up. What the? Then the alarm screamed. In the lower levels of the facility, emergency doors slammed shut, red lights flashing down the corridors. Security personnel rushed into position, weapons drawn. A breach. Someone had infiltrated the research site. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't an external attack. It was internal. Rachel's voice came through his earpiece. We've got a situation. Unknown hostiles inside the facility. Elias gritted his teeth. It was too soon. The Council fleet hadn't even fired a shot yet, and already, the battle had begun. Somewhere in the dim corridors of the research center, a group of shadows moved swiftly, undetected by most security systems. Cloaked figures, their bodies hidden under advanced camouflage tech, weaved through the facility's infrastructure like ghosts. They weren't here to fight. They were here to steal. The lead infiltrator pressed a device to a reinforced door, hacking into the lock in seconds. The steel barrier hissed open, revealing a containment chamber filled with vials of the shimmering blue liquid, the last remaining Hydra weapon samples. One of them whispered, "We take this, we end this." But before they could reach the vials, the air in the room shifted. A blur moved through the chamber. Too fast. Too precise. The first infiltrator barely had time to react before a hand grabbed his wrist, twisting it with unnatural strength. He let out a strangled gasp as he was thrown backward into the wall, hard enough to dent the metal. Rachel Vasquez stepped into the dim light, eyes glowing faintly with something not quite human. Her stance was calm, controlled, but there was something else in the way she moved. Something the infiltrators had not prepared for. They had come to steal a weapon, but the real weapon was standing right in front of them. One of them lunged at her, blade drawn. Too slow. Rachel sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and with a single sharp twist, disarmed him effortlessly. Another attacker fired a pulse round, but she was already moving, the shot passing through the air where she had been an instant before. The infiltrators exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't normal. This wasn't human. Rachel tilted her head slightly. You don't want to do this. One of them took a step back. The mission had been clear, retrieve the hydro samples before the humans could advance any further. But now, looking at her, they realized the truth. It was already too late. Outside, in the vast emptiness of space, the first shots were fired. The war had begun. The first explosion rocked the atmosphere, a deep tremor that vibrated through the Earth's orbital defenses. The Galactic Council had fired the first shot. Energy cannons flared across the darkness of space, streaks of red and blue flashing as the battle erupted. Terran warships, sleek and newly reinforced, launched from their stations, engaging the enemy with unrelenting force. Rachel Vasquez barely registered the distant battle. Her focus was locked on the infiltrators in front of her. They were trained, highly skilled, and had come with one mission: to steal the remaining hydro weapon samples. But they hadn't accounted for her. The closest one made his move, activating a high-frequency blade. The weapon vibrated with deadly precision, sharp enough to cut through steel. He lunged, and for a fraction of a second, Rachel saw the hesitation in his eyes. He had fought humans before, but she wasn't just human anymore. She caught his wrist mid-strike, twisting the blade out of his grip with effortless speed. Before he could react, she drove her elbow into his ribs, sending him crashing into the reinforced wall. The others hesitated, their minds struggling to process what they were up against. They had come expecting resistance. They hadn't expected evolution. One of them reached for the vials, but Rachel was already there. She moved faster than thought, her hand snapping around his wrist. He struggled, but her grip was unbreakable. With a controlled movement, she wrenched the vial from his grasp and stepped back. "You think taking this will change anything?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with something inhuman. The leader of the infiltrators, an older soldier with cybernetic implants running down his temples, watched her closely. His breathing was steady, his expression unreadable, but Rachel could see the tension in his stance. He understood what the others didn't yet. "You don't even know what you're turning into," he said. Rachel narrowed her eyes. "Neither do you." Before he could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently. The facility's alarms blared as another explosion echoed from above. The battle was intensifying. Far overhead, the sky was alight with destruction. Earth's orbital fleet fought with everything it had, pushing back against the combined forces of the Galactic Council. Battleships twisted through space, unleashing torrents of firepower. For every Terran vessel that fell, 3 enemy ships followed. Humanity had always fought with its back against the wall. This was no different. But it wasn't just brute force keeping them in the fight. Something was happening to the human pilots, the soldiers on the ground. Their reaction times were faster. Their endurance was pushing beyond expected limits. The Hydra weapon's influence was no longer contained to a few test subjects. It was spreading. Dr. Elias Carter stared at his monitors, pulse racing. His worst fear was unfolding in real time. The changes in the human genome were accelerating, not just in those who had consumed the Hydro liquid, but in others. The effect was spreading through unknown means, rewriting human biology faster than he could comprehend. He turned to Mira Lang, who was already pale with realization. "It's not just the volunteers anymore," she whispered. "It's all of us." Elias clenched his jaw. This was bigger than he had imagined. Whatever the Hydro weapon had done, it was no longer a controlled experiment. It was evolution at full speed, unstoppable and irreversible. Another explosion rattled the facility. The infiltrators took their chance. The leader gave a sharp hand signal, and in perfect synchronization, his team moved. Flash grenades erupted, flooding the room with blinding light. Rachel felt the shift in the air before she saw them move. Her body reacted on instinct, an instinct that hadn't existed before she changed. She pivoted, grabbing one by the collar and throwing him over her shoulder. Another lashed out, but she caught his fist midair, her grip crushing down until she felt bones shift. The leader, the only one still standing, didn't flinch. He simply watched her. "You're fighting the wrong battle, Vasquez." Rachel took a step forward. "Enlighten me." The infiltrator's voice was steady. "We were never here to stop you. We were here to warn you." Rachel hesitated for half a second. And that's when she heard it. A deep, inhuman sound rumbled through the facility. Not an explosion. Not gunfire. Something else. Her blood ran cold. She turned sharply, eyes darting toward the security monitors on the wall. And then she saw it. A figure, humanoid but wrong, moving through the lower corridors of the facility. The cameras flickered as it passed, its shape shifting unnaturally, like it wasn't bound by the laws of physics. Mira Lang gasped. "What the hell is that?" Elias Carter felt his stomach drop. The data, the anomalies, the changes happening to the human genome, it wasn't just about adaptation. The Hydra weapon had rewritten them, but it had left something unfinished. And now, something else was waking up. Rachel turned back to the infiltrator, her pulse hammering in her ears. "What did you do?" The leader shook his head grimly. "It's not us. It's you." And then the facility lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. The facility plunged into darkness, the hum of machinery replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, no one moved. Rachel could hear only the steady rhythm of her own breath, sharp and controlled. Then, in the distance, something shifted. Not footsteps. Not machinery. Something else. A presence moving through the corridors like it belonged there. Like it had been waiting. A single emergency light flickered back on, casting a dim red glow across the room. The infiltrator leader stood unmoving, his expression unreadable, but Rachel could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just concerned. He was afraid. Elias Carter's voice came through the comms, urgent and unsteady. "Rachel, you need to leave. Now." Rachel didn't hesitate. She grabbed the infiltrator by the collar and shoved him toward the door. "Whatever's happening, you're coming with me. You wanted to warn us? Now's your chance." He didn't resist. That was the second red flag. Outside the room, the facility's corridors were lined with shattered screens and blinking control panels. Security systems were failing one by one, but there was no sign of an attack. No explosions. No gunfire. Just failure. Like something was breaking reality itself. Mira Lang's voice crackled through the speakers, barely holding together. This isn't just the Hydra weapon's mutation. It's a complete breakdown of biological order. Rachel kept moving, pulse hammering. Explain. Elias was the one who answered, his voice tight with panic. The human genome is overwriting itself in real time. Whatever the Hydra weapon did to us, it wasn't stable. It wasn't just evolution. It was an invitation. A sharp clang echoed from deep within the facility. A door somewhere had been torn from its hinges. Rachel reached the main research lab and stopped cold. The screens lining the walls flickered with distorted images, security feeds from all over the facility. One by one, the cameras went dark, but not before showing glimpses of something moving through the hallways. Its form was shifting, flickering between human and something else, as though it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. And then, one of the feeds caught it staring directly into the camera. Rachel's stomach clenched. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were black voids shifting like liquid. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't running. It was observing. The infiltrator leader exhaled sharply. It's aware. Rachel turned to him. You knew this would happen. The man met her gaze, his cybernetic implants flickering. We suspected. We didn't have proof. Until now. Another deep, unnatural sound rolled through the walls like a pulse. Every screen in the room went black. Elias's voice was barely a whisper. It's not just a mutation. It's a signal. Rachel felt it then, an inexplicable shift in the air, like something unseen had just arrived. Not in the facility. Not even on Earth. Everywhere. In orbit, the battle between humanity and the Galactic Council came to a sudden halt. Ships drifted, pilots frozen mid-combat as their instruments failed. Communications turned to static. Even the stars themselves seemed to flicker. On board the command ship, High Commander Vexen gripped the control panel, his expression unreadable. What is this? An officer beside him trembled. Sir, we're detecting something. Vexen's gaze darkened. Where? The officer's throat bobbed. Everywhere. Back on Earth, Rachel felt it too. A force pressing against the edges of reality, not attacking, not invading, arriving. She turned back to the infiltrator. What the hell did we bring here? His voice was barely above a whisper. Something older than war. Then, from the far end of the corridor, it stepped into view. Rachel's breath hitched as the figure stepped fully into view. It was humanoid. At least, it had been once. Its form flickered, shifting between flesh and something fluid, like reality itself couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. Its black, shifting eyes locked onto hers, and in that instant, she felt something far worse than fear. She felt recognition. The infiltrator beside her took a slow step back. It's one of yours. Rachel didn't move. Couldn't. Because deep inside, she knew he was right. This wasn't an invader. This wasn't some alien threat lurking in the dark. This was a human. Or at least it had been. The thing tilted its head, its voice emerging in a low, distorted echo. Rachel Vasquez. Her blood ran cold. It knew her name. Elias's voice crackled in her earpiece, barely holding together through the interference. Rachel, whatever that is, it's the next stage. It's what we're becoming. And if it's already aware, he didn't need to finish. She understood. The Hydra weapon hadn't just rewritten human biology. It had accelerated it, forced evolution beyond what the body, or the mind, was meant to handle. And this thing was what waited at the end of that path. Rachel clenched her fists, grounding herself. What do you want? The being stepped closer, its movements unsettlingly smooth. To show you. Before she could react, it moved. A blur of shifting matter, its form stretching like liquid and solidifying just inches from her. Then everything went white. Rachel wasn't in the facility anymore. She was somewhere else. A void of endless space, but filled with echoes of voices, images flashing past her in an instant. Human faces, cities, battles, the first moments of discovery when the Hydra weapon had been unleashed. And then she saw herself. Not as she was, but as something more. Something no longer bound by flesh. The truth hit her like a pulse of energy. This wasn't just a mutation. It was transcendence. And humanity had no choice in the matter. The vision snapped away, and Rachel was back in the facility, gasping for breath. The being stood before her, waiting. She understood now. They weren't fighting a war against the Galactic Council. They weren't even fighting against their own transformation. They were fighting time itself. Rachel met its gaze, her mind racing. If this change was inevitable, if humanity was already on this path, then the real question wasn't how to stop it. It was whether they should. She turned to the infiltrator. You wanted to stop this? His jaw tightened. We still can. Rachel exhaled slowly. No, we can't. The being's expression didn't change, but Rachel could feel its approval. It wasn't here to destroy them. It was here to welcome them. And then, in the distance, another explosion rocked the facility. The battle outside wasn't over. The Galactic Council still saw humanity as a threat. They wouldn't stop. Not until every last human was eliminated. Rachel squared her shoulders. They wanted to wipe humanity out before the change was complete. Before they became something the universe couldn't control. She turned to the being, her voice steady. Then let's show them what we really are. Outside, in the dark expanse of space, the tide of battle shifted. Human ships moved faster, their pilots reacting before their enemies could even fire. On the ground, soldiers fought with impossible precision, their bodies pushing beyond natural limits. The change was no longer creeping. It was happening. And as Rachel stood in the center of it all, she knew the war had never been about the Hydra weapon. It had never been about survival. It had always been about ascension. And humanity was ready. The sky burned with streaks of light as the battle above Earth reached its peak. Ships twisted and spun, their weapons firing in a blur of energy and steel. But something had changed. The human pilots moved differently now, their reflexes impossibly fast, their actions seamless as if they already knew the outcome of each fight before it happened. The enemy forces, once overwhelming, now faltered, struggling to keep up with something they couldn't fully understand. Rachel stood at the heart of it all, her body still humming with the strange energy left behind by the being. She could feel the change now, deep in her bones, in her mind. It wasn't just power, it was clarity. The infiltrator beside her watched the security screens in stunned silence as the tide of battle turned. He had fought to stop this, to prevent humanity from taking this step. But now, as he saw the raw force unfolding before him, he spoke in a hushed voice. This was never a war, was it? Rachel shook her head. No, it was a test. A final explosion lit up the sky as the last of the enemy fleet was forced into retreat. The Galactic Council had come to end humanity before they could evolve. But they had failed. And now, they would have to face a future where humans were no longer just another species in the galaxy. They were something more. Elias Carter's voice crackled over the comms, still laced with disbelief. Rachel, we've won. She exhaled slowly, taking in the words. Had they really won? Or had they just stepped onto a path they could never turn back from? The being, the future of humanity, remained still, watching her, waiting. Mira Lang's voice came through the comms next, urgent but measured. If we embrace this, there's no undoing it. We'll change beyond recognition. We won't be what we were before. Rachel glanced at the infiltrator. The resistance against this transformation had been strong, but now, even he seemed uncertain. Humanity had spent so long fearing the unknown, fearing change. But standing at the edge of something greater, Rachel realized the truth. They hadn't lost their humanity. They had expanded it. She turned back to the being, speaking with quiet certainty. Tell me one thing. When we become like you, do we lose who we are? The being met her gaze, and for the first time, its voice softened. No, you become more of who you were meant to be. Rachel let out a slow breath. Maybe that was the real answer. Not losing, not replacing, growing. Elias spoke again, his voice steady now. Then it's our choice. No one else's. Rachel looked at the security screens one last time. The battle was over. The galaxy had tried to stop them. It had failed. The future was theirs now. She turned back to the infiltrator. You still think we should stop this? He hesitated, then finally shook his head. I think it was never ours to stop. Rachel nodded. The decision had already been made, not just by her, not just by the soldiers and scientists who had pushed the limits of human evolution. The moment humanity had embraced the Hydra weapon, the moment they had refused to kneel to fear, they had already stepped into their future. The being took a step back, its form flickering like a shadow caught between worlds. Then it's time. The air around Rachel shimmered, and for a brief second, she saw it, the endless possibilities stretching before them. A galaxy where humanity was no longer just surviving, no longer fighting for a place, but leading. Rachel closed her eyes, exhaling one last time as she whispered, "We're ready." And with that, the future began.